Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Project Fairlady. So today on the bench, I've got the camshafts out of the VG30DETT. Now these are JWT 500 series cams, the hydraulic version. These were what was in the motor when we pulled it out and disassembled it. Again, just for background, this engine is supposed to have roughly 10,000 Ks on it since its rebuild, but that was apparently about 8 or 9 years ago. And you'd be aware from all of the videos that I've been making how poor a rebuild was done on this engine, how it had a crap ton of money thrown at it in the way of parts, just like these beautiful camshafts here. But when it came to the assembly of the engine, it has been lacking in pretty much every regard, as you guys would have seen. So from some of my other videos, you'll know that I've been working on the heads. I recently had them apart, reported them, and they are now waiting on new valve guides and stuff like that. Again, stuff that should have been done on the original rebuild. So looking at these camshafts, there has been a little bit of oil contamination. There is some marks on the journals on the camshafts. There is also some marks on the lobes of the camshafts. The marks on the journals are from crap in the oil, abrasive stuff, bits of grit that's been spinning around in the bearings, probably a dirty assembly of the engine. Let's zoom in close and we'll have an in-depth look at these, and I'll show you exactly what I've discovered and what I'm having to do to correct the issues that I've found. Alright, let's get in tight. Not the first time I've heard that either. So as I mentioned, if we start looking along these journals, you can see where stuff's being picked up in the bearing, and it's just been spinning around like, you know, a little tiny bit of grit that's sort of done a few revolutions in there. So of course the heads and the caps in the head have the same sort of impressions in them. They're not deep, but they are there. You can barely feel them. But yeah, it's kind of everywhere. Some worse than others. Feel that one a little bit. Right. Now what's gone on there? Well, it might be just some crap. A few marks though. It's not too bad, but it's definitely there. It definitely needs to be taken care of at this stage. Yeah, that's a bit of a nasty one there. Definitely feel that one. You can hear it too. Yeah, that one's got a few marks in it as well. Okay, so what I'm about to do, guys, I'm going to start linishing the camshafts on the lathe. And you can see this one here has already been done. So if you look at these journals, so you can still kind of see remnants of a light mark around the middle there. But you can't feel that anymore. You can just kind of see it. But yeah, so it looks pretty good. Obviously they're all the same. These three here have marks all over them. This one was no different. So this guy here has been processed on the lathe. So that's been run and cleaned up with 400 grit wet and dry, and then 600 grit after that. So that's a 600 grit finish. Obviously I've only taken off the bare minimum. You can see the micrometer there. I've been checking against the factory specs while I'm doing this to make sure I have enough meat to play with doing this sort of stuff. And honestly, it takes off such a small amount. It's barely measurable from start to finish. I've also cleaned up the lobes on this cam. It's very hard without a really expensive camera to pick this stuff up and show you. But the lobes, they're okay, but there are definitely marks in them. But they're from something else. They're from the lifters, and I'll give you a bit of a squiz at the lifters in a minute. So if we look at that lobe there, you can see it's got a few marks in it. None of them are very deep, but they're enough to show up in the light reflection when you move around it. Yes, so there is very fine, particularly microscopic damage on these lobes. Like I say, it's very hard to photograph. See that pattern that's there. And those little divots in the surface, that is from the lifters. So as I say, that one there is done. That's that. That's a right-hand intake cam, and this is a right-hand exhaust cam. I'm about to mount that on the lathe and start linishing her up. So I thought I'd make this video and give you guys a look at the process of linishing up one of these camshafts. Alright guys, so we're all chucked up in the lathe. We're just running a collet chuck. All works out really well. It won't mark up the cam or anything. So before we start, I'll do the journals first, just so that we can have a look at those. Let's see what we're starting with here. So when I'm doing the journals on something like this, I'll run the lathe at about between 200 and 300 RPM, and then I'll dial it back when I'm doing the lobes on the cam, because it's a little bit harder to control with obviously with that lobe shape as it's going around. But I can run a little bit faster because we're just going around that nice round area of the journals there. So I run them forwards and backwards, which is not really that important when you're doing the journals, but when you're doing the lobes, so that you are ramping over from both sides, not just one side, so you get more of an even pattern on both sides of the lobe. You know, otherwise you'll find that on the face of the ramp, depending on which direction you're going, you'll get more or less effort applied by the paper as far as cleanup goes, and depending on what you're actually trying to get rid of, you may just have to kind of work one way more so than the other, as in forwards or reverse. But I'll set up a camera on a tripod, and I'll start at this. I will hit it with some 400, then we'll have a bit of a look, and then I'll just clean it up with some 600 after that, and we should be sweet. Alright guys, so that's where we are now after a quick pass with some 400. And 400 gives you roughly the equivalent finish to how most of your cams come. Depending on the cam manufacturer, they might be more or less polished or you know, cleaned up to an extent, but they're generally around that, you know, 600, 800 even. Sometimes the cams come even micro polished. It depends on their application really. All right, so you can see that we've pretty much got rid of just about everything. You can still see remnants of some little sections there, like you can still see remnants of that scratch that was around there. But what we've done is we've knocked all the high bits off. So whenever you have a scratch in something like this, even though the scratch itself is a low spot where something's been dug into it, what happens is the edges of that scratch will be raised. And then what that does, as this rotates around, the raised edges of that scratch will then cut into the opposite piece of this, which will be the head or the cam cap in the head, and we'll start chewing bits of aluminium out of that. So again, just like with the hydraulic lifters, once things start chewing into each other, it just accelerates. Unless it's dealt with fairly quickly, you will get this accelerated wear profile. So the best thing that you can do is clean everything up and keep it that way, and it will certainly increase the longevity of all your components. So obviously that footage was sped up a bit. Took a few minutes to do that. Not a huge amount of time, but we are nowhere near finished. So what I'll do now is I will run 400 on these lobes on the cam. You can see there's a bit of something going on. Where are we? There. Bit of something going on here. Again, you can see there's definitely some wear on this second lobe, so keep an eye on that one, guys. As when we clean that one up, you can sort of see the discoloration, but you can also see this kind of wear pattern that's forming across the front. And if you see how the light's reflecting, how it's not reflecting evenly, so there's obviously wear. You can see little lines across here where this is starting to wear, and that would be because it was sitting on one of those worn hydraulic lifters that has started to create an impression in the face of this lifter. And here it looks like they're, come on baby, friggin' focus. So it looks like it's picked up some crap off the lifter that's just sort of stuck to it there, I reckon. But yeah, you can see there's definitely shit going on with this lobe here that needs fixing up. Not bad, that one's, see a few marks in that one. A lot harder for you guys to see because you got that friggin' light reflecting off there, which isn't as much of a problem for me, but I can see that that one's definitely got some issues with it. Yeah, same with that one, just the light pattern. You can see the reflection kind of bending. Sorry for dicking around so much with this, guys. I'm just trying to find an angle that picks up what I can see and being able to see it in the screen. You can sort of see how the light going across the top is tapering down over the sides when it should be just a straight line. Again, it's just kind of almost microscopic wear that's been happening there. Same with this. All right, let's see if that's any better. Probably will be too dark now. Let's go to this really bad one that you can see. Alright, you can sort of see a bit better there. Camera just wants to do its own thing. Bloody hell. So anyway, I'm going to dress this up with some 400 and you'll see the improvements, guys. Sorry about the shitty camera work. But it's just, you know, it's bloody hopeless trying to get good footage with just using a phone or a cheap camera. Anyway, I'll keep filming and I'll just give those a hit and we'll come back to them. Alright guys, so this is our clean up with 600 on the lobes. You can see this this guy here. That was the worst lobe out of them, and you can see it's pretty much perfect. Alright, that's zoomed right up now. See that first lobe? Absolutely sweet. This second one, you can see it's still got a little tiny bit just here. See that there? But that isn't a problem. I'm not going to keep going at the lobe there with 400 just to clean that up. That's kind of right on the edge. It's not really going to do any damage, considering our lifters have been refaced, and we are still going to be going over this with some 600 anyway, and I'll just sort of put a little bit of extra effort into that lobe when I'm going at it with the 600. So yeah, looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit just there. That's why I'm going over them with the magnifying glass and a torch once they're done, just so that I can make sure that I'm not missing anything. So they look pretty good. They all look pretty good. So what I'll do, guys, I'll go over it with 800 and have another look at it. I will use a magnifying glass and a torch, have a good look, see if there's any defects, and I may do a couple of touch-ups, or it might be you know, good the way it is. But as you can see from what we started with, you know, it's looking pretty sweet. It's looking pretty sweet. You'd be happy to be putting this back in your engine, particularly once it's had the final processing done on it, compared to what it looked like when we started. All right, I'll carry on and I'll be back. Alright, so that's this cam finished now. So that's finished with 600. Been pretty good. If you flick back to where we started with this, you'll certainly see the difference. So the finer you go, the more you will kind of see stuff. Like it'll kind of highlight scratches and things. Like you can see a little tiny scratch there, that's nothing. You can see that groove around there is now kind of highlighted, but it's very, very smooth. Like, you can feel it with your nail, but only just. But there's definitely no edges on it, so it's not going to do any damage. It'll just fill up with oil and just run nice. It's all pretty good. The main thing is we've gotten rid of any lumps that are going to start picking up on either the bearings or the lifters. This is that second one that was a little bit nastiest out of all of them, which was only very, very slight still. But, you can see it really highlights little things, like the further you go, the finer you go with the grit, the more you'll see stuff. It gets hidden in the coarser grit, but you know, there's no need to go any further than 600, I reckon, personally. It's pretty smooth. It's pretty much a factory finish, if not slightly smoother. But yeah, you can see little tiny marks that you're starting to see there. Like, that's nothing. That's just sort of a scuff. That little corner, still see it there. Again, nothing to worry about. Very, very good. Certainly a huge improvement on journal and lobe finish. As I say, you can keep going with this if you want. You probably saw me measure all the journals. They're all well within spec. There's plenty of meat on these. Like I say, it pretty much has a negligible effect doing this to the overall sizing of the journals and stuff, being that this is very, very hard material. You're really only knocking off loose stuff on the surface and just really, really refining that sort of finish. Just getting rid of stuff that's a little bit dangerous, that's a little bit not friendly to the other components. So yeah, and even things like, I've seen people talking about, you know, oh, you're going to round off the lobes on the cam because you're not using a stone or whatever. Yeah, I disagree. When you're only going lightly at it like this, you know, that was only 200 RPM we were running at, which is very slow. Not a huge amount of pressure. I'm using wet and dry cut into strips, which is only paper. So you can imagine if I'm pulling hard on it, it's just going to break the wet and dry strips. So I'm only using very light pressure. I tend to always use wet and dry over emery paper on stuff like this, because if I do get caught up with it in some freak accident, you know, if the paper does get wrapped around and caught on one of the lobes, it'll just break. It won't sort of pull me in, whereas emery paper and emery cloth is a lot stronger. Not that it's, you know, it's like the emergency kill switch is only here, so it's very easy for me to get to, and the lathe stops instantly. But yeah, I just generally use wet and dry. That way I can custom make the strips as well, instead of being stuck to a pre-made roll. So what I'll do is I'll cut strips the width of the lobes, and then I'll cut strips the width of the journals, because they are two different sizes. And again, that stops any chance of you know, unevenly moving across the surface and paying more attention to one bit more than the other. You know, just using properly sized paper will tend to do that, but that's looking pretty good. So we'll drag this guy off and head back over to the bench. So they're all done now, guys. They all turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with everything. Yes, there are still little imperfections, but that's to be expected. After all, we are just simply flattening the surface off and removing imperfections. We're not trying to completely get rid of any marks. You can see this little groove that's still there. That's absolutely fine. And there are various marks, or various grooves, should I say, left on some of the journals. But the issue is you can't you know, take the journal down to the bottom of the groove, because it'll make the journal undersized. But what you're trying to do is get rid of any shoulders that are left on the outside of that groove, because a groove's okay, it'll just fill up with oil and it'll kind of help carry oil. But the problem is the mountains, like the peaks on stuff, but not the valleys. Obviously something's cut that in there. You'll probably find the bearing cap has the same mark in it. On the other side it probably has another valley in it. But as I say, valleys are fine, peaks are the problem. So anywhere where there's material that's been picked up on there, or there's a rough surface, all we're really trying to do is just knock off the peaks. And that does reduce the depth of the valleys in some areas. But really it's the peaks, particularly the points of the peaks, not really the whole peak. Because if it's a peak with a flat top on it, again, that's absolutely fine. It's just points that we want to get rid of. We want to get rid of all the points. Same with the lobes on the camshafts. Again, like, it's really we want to get rid of any areas that have been that will pick up material off the lifter. So any roughness or any kind of sharp bits or any material that's attached itself to the lobes of the cam that's already been picked up off the lifters, or through some other means, whether it's a piece of debris that's been jammed in between the two and embedded itself in either the camshaft lobe or the lifter. We just want to get rid of all that so that we're back to having a really nice smooth finish that will not wear against the lifter, and the same with the lifter. We want very nice smooth finishes on our lifters that won't wear against the camshafts. So all of this is really just preventative maintenance, guys. It just means that you are going to extend the life of your camshafts and extend the life of your lifters, because in the state that these cams are in, not that old, but the lobes starting to show signs of wear from a bad set of lifters, and the journals from having contamination within the oil from an unknown source. That situation, if left unchecked, would have led to premature wear on the cams and premature failure. Eventually you would have had to replace them, and also the lifters would have been beyond repair, which they pretty much were anyway, most of them. So now that that's all sorted, we've got a nice resurfaced and rebuilt set of lifters ready to go in the engine with these Linished resurfaced cams. So I'm very happy with how this has all turned out. If you guys think this is a service that you might be interested in the Z32 community, I don't currently think anyone is doing this for people who are just rebuilding the top of their engine. If they're, doing cams and lifters and things like that, let me know, because if it is something that you guys are chasing, I can happily set it up on my website and provide it to people as a service. And I'll probably do the same thing with lifters, but I'll talk about that again later. I've got to have a look at some tooling first, just to see if I can reface the lifters and rebuild them in a more timely manner to make it sort of financially viable to offer that as a service as well. All right, guys, as always, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. I hope you found this video educational in some way. As always, guys, I'll bloody well see you on the next one. Cheers.